Share my screen. Let's see. And Cindy, if you wouldn't mind, I think I'm recording, but just on the off chance that I am not,
I saw the message that said that it was being recorded.
perfect.
Yes.
Whenever
Oh,
I'm doing a lunch and learn at the office, I have dual screens and it gets a little complicated, so I just unplugged it and I'm going off of my laptop. All right. Thank you all for coming today. Today we are going to talk about how to set up a community garden in your community. So this could be something that you want to do within your neighborhood. This could be something that you might want to do within your church community. Um, there's a lot of different places and reasons why you might want to have a community garden. A lot of subdivisions now, new builds are you know, coming up with the brilliant idea of having some raised beds and allowing folks that live in that subdivision to rent a raised bed there. So that's kind of nice as we get more and more populated. Community gardens are a great thing because lot sizes tend to get a lot smaller. We tend to build up, not necessarily out. And as Gwinnett County has built up and the whole metro area specifically has built up versus out, we have a lot smaller lot sizes, sometimes only, 3/10 of an acre, 2/10 of an acre, or maybe you're in a condo. So you can do some gardening if you have a patio or something like that, but it's always nice if you can actually go out to a place where you can have a nice raised bed and mingle with the community. So I'm going to talk about how you set that up. Okay, so putting the community into the community gardens, there's a lot of reasons, like I said, why you might want to do that. Some people think, oh, it's going to give me a place where I can plant stuff and I can harvest my own food. I don't have a lot of room where I live, so this is perfect. But there are other reasons too. A lot of times it's because maybe you aren't too interested in gardening, you just want to connect with other people outside, and it's just a convenient way to do that. Sometimes people want to give back to the community, and so they grow food and then they donate it to the local food banks to give back to the community that way. There's a lot of different reasons why some people just want to try it and see if they like it before they, do anything to their own backyard. Whatever your reason is, go for it because gardening is a great therapeutic thing to get into. A lot of times, you meet lifelong friends who also like to garden. So it's a great way to meet people if you're new to a community and you just don't really know a whole lot of people. It's a nice place, and most gardeners are really nice people. So you can, meet some friends and share some coffee, sit down at some of the tables that most community gardens have, and really just kind of dive in and get to know people. So, first of all, let's say that in your neighborhood, for instance, or your church, you have a space and you're like, this would be awesome. We could maybe fit 10 or 12 4x8 beds in here. What do we need to do? Well, first of all, you're going to make a plan. So it's very similar to a business plan, where you need to kind of come up with what the name of the business is, what you're going to do, financials, that kind of stuff. You're going to do that here. So whoever the like-minded folks are that are interested in doing this community garden, get together. Just like you see here, have a bunch of folks come up, sit down, you're going to talk about what you're going to do. So, what's the purpose? Do you want it to be private, just for the folks that live in the neighborhood? Do you want it to be open to the public? For instance, maybe it's on church grounds and they're okay with that. Who will the leaders be? You can't have a community garden if you don't have some people in charge. It just becomes chaotic and it just doesn't work unless you have folks that are in charge, somebody or some multiple somebodies for those people that are in that garden to look up to and to ask questions. You have to then decide what kind of gardening are we going to do? There are several different ways that you can go about this. One garden, Lanier Community Garden, that's up near Buford, they have rather large plots and they're in ground, and some of them have raised beds. Basically, you're just leasing a parcel of a very, very small parcel of land within that garden area. And if you want to put raised beds on it, you can do that. If you want to garden in ground, you can do that too. Um, most community gardens, I will say, use raised beds just because of the convenience factor. You have your raised beds lined up. You then are able to have numbers on them. You can keep track of who's renting what, and it's really just a great way where you don't have to worry so much about the weeds on the ground. If you come in, you can put gravel down, that kind of stuff. And it's easier and neater to keep that way versus trying to let people know, hey, you've got too many weeds over here. It's growing into the garden, the maintenance, all of that stuff. So if you've decided raised beds, what are the startup costs? You need to understand that there are different levels of raised beds. You can do cedar boards, you can do like a hardy plank type situation, you can do plastic, and then just regular old untreated lumber. Don't use treated lumber. So knowing what your startup costs are going to be are very, very important. How will the money be used? How is it going to be structured? So are you going to request that folks pay maybe $35 per growing season? Are you going to have a yearly fee? When are those fees due? January 1st? You need to talk about those kinds of things. And then you also need to look at what those rules are going to be. I know a lot of people are like, oh, rules. Why? Why do we need rules? And everybody needs rules. You've got to have something to live by. There's a lot of people that are great and aren't going to abuse the system. And then there are quite a few others that without rules they're going to be a problem. So rules give you something to fall back on. So if that person becomes a problem, you can always go back and point at the rules and say, look, rule number 10 states no pets in the garden, and you are continuously bringing your dog. That's not allowed. So you stop bringing your dog, or you're no longer allowed to be in this garden, something like that. So first and foremost, you need to make sure that everybody's on board. So this is probably more of an thing in a neighborhood situation. Maybe you have just a vacant lot that the builder never built out on, and so now you're eyeballing that in the HOA, and you're like, hey, we want a community garden here. So maybe the neighbor next door isn't on board, because that is going to suddenly mean that they're going to have a lot of strangers poking around in beds right next to their house. Maybe they're not on board. So you need to make sure that everyone surrounding that land, everybody who would have some type of a stake in that, is on board. So do it the right way. If it is an HOA, make sure you have buy-in. If it's just a regular old community, make sure the folks on that street have a buy-in. Just make sure that all the stakeholders have you have that correct buy-in. What that also will do is that will also identify other folks maybe who weren't aware that you were thinking about doing this, and so that may actually bring additional people into the fold. I haven't found too many people who aren't for that kind of a garden. So usually it's going to be just fine, but make sure that especially the surrounding property owners have buy-in. So choosing a site. Again, you need that space to be available, and you need the permission in writing from a resident or the county or the neighborhood. There's a lot of different levels of community gardens. You have Lanier Community Garden up there in Buford. I'll use them again as an example. They actually have their garden on space that's owned by Gwinnett County Water Resources, I believe. So it's just a big vacant area, and they asked for permission to put a garden, a community garden up there. And since the county wasn't using it, they were like, sure, let's do this. You also have the city of Suwanee. They have a park area that has a nice little community garden that they kind of oversee. And then you have Harvest Gwinnett, which is a program within Gwinnett County where they manage 11 different gardens at different county parks all throughout the county. They'll probably be adding more, but those counties that everything is provided, and then they just lease those beds to the folks that live in that area. We'll talk about that a little bit later. First of all, when you're siting it, you need to make sure that you can actually support growing vegetables. So each site needs to have at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. So if there's a lot of trees on this site, you will either have to remove trees or you're going to have to cut down on the number of beds that you have. Make sure also that if you can get something that's fairly flat, that's going to do a lot better for erosion and for folks that are using bed. Nobody likes climbing up and down hills to get places. So you want to be able to, use this, have folks that are all ages to use this community garden. So take in mind there's going to be a lot of people that are maybe mobility challenged, that you need to make sure that you have good walkways, wide walkways, an easy way for people to get to wherever the garden is going to be. So kind of keep in mind the whole ADA accessible thing if you're going to be open to the public, and try to offer taller beds if you can possibly do that. And wasn't quite there. So that you can offer that to everyone. And also it needs to be close to a source of water. So I cannot emphasize this enough. We have really super hot summers in Georgia, and having super hot summers in Georgia means that you have to water a lot. And if you have to water a lot, then, you're constantly hauling water or pulling a hose out or something really, I just call that really annoying. I have that problem at my own house. I have a bunch of raised beds and they're way in the backyard. I live on a little over an acre, so I'm constantly going down the hill. I got to go turn the water on. And if there's a kink in the hose, I got to figure out where the kink in the hose is. It's just really annoying. So if you can set up multiple sources of water around where all those raised beds are, that way, if you have folks that are if you have folks that are using the bed over here on the left, maybe you have 10 beds set up, and somebody comes from over here to hit their bed on the right, you don't have arguments over who's watering. So try to have multiple stations for water set up so that you don't have to worry about a water schedule. Develop a master plan. You don't need to be an artist, but it helps if you are. No, I'm just kidding. There are software packages that you can look at online and that will help visualize the area. So you can see here you have kind of a master plan for a garden. This happens to be Snellville Community Garden. That's in Briscoe Park in Snellville in Gwinnett County, and they are constantly making improvements. So this is what their ultimate thought is on what they're going to have. So you can see they've got a beekeeping area, they've got some red maples, a little amphitheater area. They've got their main entry there, and then a covered spot, and then their greenhouse where they grow all of their little seedlings that they sell at their plant sale and on the at the Snellville Farmers Market. So, and then you see, of course, all of the raised beds that that folks can lease out. One of our master gardeners, Wes Nettleton, is kind of over the greenhouse, and he does all the growing of that stuff, and it's great. He is a fantastic resource to that community. But this is a city of Snellville type of community garden. So, and this is a perfect example of what you see. So he gets grants through Food Well Alliance and some other types of organizations, nonprofits, and that's how they were able to put the little shelter in the middle with a wash station and some other things. So there's resources out there for funds to build these if you're looking. All right, putting together your leaders and agreeing on your rules. So again, I cannot emphasize enough that you've got to have rules. It's going to be a chaotic community garden if you don't do that. So you want to make sure you post them. These are very creative ways of posting them. I myself would be more of a fan of using an aluminum sign. As an aside, you can actually get those at Amazon for really super cheap. You don't have to pay a ton of money, but having signage posted will remind everyone you don't have to go looking for it online or in a little building or something like that. If you post your rules around, and you can get creative and paint it up really cute like you see here, but it tells the hours that it's open. And that's especially important if you're in a neighborhood, because you don't want somebody walking around at 10:30 at night trying to pick their vegetables because they forgot to come out later. And the person next door is like, what in the heck is going on over there? Who then calls the cops, and then the cops come and they're like, what are you doing? And the person's like, I'm picking my tomatoes because I forgot to do it. And they're like, it's 10:30 at night. Why are you out here? So yeah, you can see why having some rules, simple rules like your open hours and other things like, not picking other people's stuff, not leaving your produce on the plants for it to rot, because that will, that stinks, number one, but two, it can and bring insects in. Littering, having an animal there, a dog, when you're not supposed to, that kind of stuff. So make sure that you agree on those rules. Leadership. So I am a great proponent of having a board that is in place, just like an HOA board, an elected board for garden leadership. In the case of like where the county or the city oversees it, and there's a budget that goes for those particular gardens, excuse me, it's not necessary to have a board in place. You can do something like Harvest Gwinnett does. They have a couple of garden ambassadors that kind of oversee and help with those particular gardens. But in a true community garden, you got to have a board, an elected board for garden leadership. And you want to make that formal, just like you would with an HOA. So that means that those folks are nominated and elected officers. You're going to have a president, a vice president, a treasurer, and a secretary. You got to have somebody to handle the funds when people lease those beds. That is my recommendation. I've seen both, and an informal is much more chaotic. But it's going to be very similar to an advisory board, and you'll have, the same rough board positions that are there of interested members. So like maybe it's, just a group of neighbors or something like that, and you can all get along. It's a very small area. An informal board might work just fine if you only have a handful of beds. But if you're talking that you have 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 beds, you're probably better off with a formal form of leadership. Garden guidelines. So those officers that are elected should get together and develop that set of rules. Everybody has to agree on them, and you have to vote on them, because as I mentioned, without that set of rules, things get really crazy, and it'll start to fall apart, because there's always a bad egg in there somewhere who just plants things and then forgets about it. Or maybe they come with their Aunt Janice, and Aunt Janice is like, look at those tomatoes over there. I think I need a couple of those for my salad tonight. And so she helps herself. Things that don't work so well. So you want to make sure that you have rules that are posted so that there's no conflict. And posting signage as a reminder is a good thing. I know everyone's like, I hate signs, but believe me, having it posted, you have a way that if somebody comes in and starts doing that kind of stuff, if you're there on site, because there are a lot of people that think a community garden means that anybody can come in and help themselves. fencing does great with that, with a lock, but not everybody has that opportunity. But you can certainly post signage that says these are privately managed beds or something along the lines of that. So here's some sample rules. So you pay an annual membership fee somewhere between $25 to $50 per season or per calendar year, whichever way you want to manage that. And so you need the treasurer to manage those funds. The funds will go for trash collection or buildings or cutting the grass or something like that. No pets in the garden. A lot of community gardens are that way. You can't always stop an animal from relieving itself, and we all know that there are those irresponsible pet owners that ruin it for everybody else. So, generally speaking, no pets in the garden. A lot of gardens are really, they don't like the use of pesticides unless authorized. And most that I've seen recently are organic only. That can get very tricky, especially if you're a beginning gardener, because you don't really know how to deal with that. So education is very key here. And that's what Extension is for. We're here to help educate you. So if you want to start a community garden, please reach out to us. That is what we are here for, and we can help walk you through that, including the education components. Individual plots must be maintained and weeded regularly. This is one of the biggest contentions I've ever seen in a community garden. There are people that only come a handful of times at the beginning of the year. They plant everything, it looks great, and then they go away and you never see them again. And so their crops grow and they rot and nobody harvests them, or sometimes people will go and take them, but it's not really spelled out anywhere that what you're supposed to do in a situation like that. So my advice is spell it out in the rules. Make sure that if that bed is not maintained for maybe say 2 weeks, that board members have the right to go in and harvest that produce and donate it. That's a good one. You may also stipulate that if folks go on vacation and the bed can't be not maintained after a week, that you have to get somebody else to come in and water or maintain it. Don't let it just lay fallow and rot on the vines. That's a big waste of produce, and it makes everyone else around you angry. Abandoned plots are subject to takeover. So I mentioned takeover. Now, don't take it over if they're gone for 2 weeks. They may just be on a European vacation. But if it's been from June to September and nobody's come out to do anything in that plot, it's safely you can probably call that abandoned, especially after you email and call the person. So at that point, you could probably take it over and then rent it out again. So no borrowing or theft is allowed. Violators can be prohibited from gardening, and that includes taking produce. So if you don't have permission from your neighboring bed to harvest their watermelon that they've been growing for, half the summer, don't take it. Even if they've just left it there and it looks like it's ripe, leave it, because unless it's spelled out in the rules and that person comes out regularly, leave it alone. So you might find yourself ousted from the community garden. The use of water conservation techniques are most. You got to turn the hose off. You can't just leave it run over your bed and drench it. You have to be smart about how you're using water, because in some cases you may have to haul in water and they have big tanks. So somebody's got to fill that up. Just be smart, be judicious about it. We don't have an endless supply here in Georgia. We get all our water from Lake Lanier, sometimes deep aquifers, but we don't have an endless supply. So be smart about that. And also, it shouldn't go without saying, please don't blast music. So again, some of these are in areas and neighborhoods or churches, and wear your earbuds. You don't need to blast your music. We're not washing the car, so just be mindful. Okay, these are some examples of approved materials. This is the community garden in Snellville. So you can see the list of fertilizers, mulches, topsoils. This is going to be in the bylaws section. And so if you're thinking of starting a community garden, there are so many examples out here. Almost everybody has this online if you have a community garden. So all you have to really do is type in community garden and you'll get 1,000 websites. And so you can go and pull all of these garden rules and applications and look at them and compare, see which rules you like, see which rules you don't like. You see an approved materials list. Maybe you don't want to be that strict. So you can definitely take that down a notch, or maybe you want to make it only organic. If that's the case, then you have to spell that out and you have to have an approved materials list. The Harvest Gwinnett folks have an approved materials list. They are organic only, so they list what you can and can't use. Consider a sign so people who are interested know who to contact. And that would be posted right at the garden. Of course, you can also do social media. You can have a Facebook page, you can have an Instagram account, you can do Snapchat, you can do all of that stuff. And I highly encourage that because so many people are online now. You don't need to send ads out or anything like that organically if you get people in, but this is a good one because a lot of these community gardens are in heavily populated areas and people are moving in and out all the time. So having a sign there so that they know who to contact, have a QR code that goes to your website, have a website. There are free ones out there. I definitely recommend it. That way they can get all the rules and everything else, the board members, all of that stuff, have it all very handy right there for somebody to look at if they happen to go through, because after all, it's a community. You want folks to really pour into their community and they got to have a way to get hold of you if they want a bed there. So make it simple. Theft. Again, it's a big problem. I know a lot of the Harvest Gwinnett folks, they've got tall fences around every garden and there's a lock on the gate and there's a reason. My mom is a master gardener and she also does community gardening over at Vines. I hear stories about people that they're in there doing their thing in their own bed, or they're in the share beds growing the food for the community, and some random person wanders in and starts walking around, and you tend to, if you're there enough, you tend to know who's in the garden and who's not. So if you just have some rando that walks right in and they're walking around, you may let them do that for a second, but then you're probably going to ask, can I help you? And then that person may go, oh, I saw the gate was open and I just thought I could come see what I could get. And then you have to go, well, it's not a community as in you can take whatever you want garden. These are all beds that people have leased so that they can grow their food in there. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought it just meant it was a community garden. Like anybody could come pick stuff. That's called a food forest, not a community garden. And so, no. So you might want to invest in some signs like this all around the perimeter if it's not fenced that says, if you did not plant it, do not pick it. And that's as much for the other folks that are in the garden as just some random person that happened to drive by and see it. Of course, you're probably going to have folks that no matter if they read it or not, aren't going to care. And they're going to come in and, maybe jump the fence or whatever. But that will cut down on the number of people that try to come in and take produce. So developing a committee and teams, that's also part of it. You're going to want to have, if you've got a area that maybe you're donating the produce to. The Harvest Gwinnett folks have areas where they lease beds to people, and then they also have what they call the share beds. So that's a section of beds where they grow produce to deliver and donate to the community food banks, so that they have fresh produce. And it's an awesome program. I encourage, if you are considering having a community garden and you have space, that might be something that you want to do. Set aside 2 beds or so, if you have that, where people grow things, and then that gets donated along with whatever else people don't use to the local community food banks. So having a committee and teams to help with stuff like that, it helps, obviously, because sometimes the weeding issue can get out of control, especially if you don't have someone who's dedicated to cutting the grass or using a string trimmer. You may also want to have a watering crew. So if you have a small community garden, or maybe it's a church community garden or something like that, maybe have someone who, or some ones who are on the watering crew. And then those folks can take turns coming out to the garden and watering, especially during hot weather. It's very handy. And sometimes people don't want to go out in the hot weather all the time to take care of their own bed. If you've got 3 or 4 people who have beds, take turns. Mary does it on Monday, Josh does it on Wednesday, Frankie does it on Friday, whatever. But come up with, some solutions so that it's not as hard for you to garden, because gardening is not for the faint at heart. I mean, you're out there in the elements. Have a weeding crew. So cutting the grass, weed whacking, getting, those kinds of things. We get a lot of rain here and it's very hot and humid and it grows really fast and the weeds will overtake. So have folks who are on a weeding crew that help keep that down. A harvesting crew. So if you, again, going back to if you have people that have abandoned their beds or folks that are out of town for a week or two and don't have anybody taking care of it, if you've written it into the rules that that produce that's laying there for 2 weeks or so gets harvested, or you have share beds, you have a harvesting crew to make sure things get picked and they can educate others on when to harvest, and if they don't want their stuff, then that they'll take it and donate it, and help prevent some of this rotting on the vine, poor maintenance practices, that kind of stuff. And then a distribution crew. So if you are donating to a food bank, these folks would be the ones that would actually take it over there and have a rotating schedule of that. Just make it easier. Distribute all of the work. Other teams, insect and pest control. So these can be folks that know a lot about bugs, fungal diseases, other stuff, and they can help gardeners, new gardeners, with education by teaching them or lead by example in the common areas. So if you have some shared beds, you can do all of these things. A lot of times folks will just come up and ask for, what are you doing? Tell me what you're doing. And that's a great way to educate people. Fundraising. Raise money for water, fencing, sheds, tools, benches. And don't forget, you can also look at grants. Grants are a really big thing. Community gardens, there's a lot of money out there for that. So start searching for grants for that kind of stuff. I mentioned Foodwell Alliance. That's a good one. Have a newsletter. That way someone can do a real quick little newsletter with email updates. Let's say the board turns over and you've got new folks. You can have an email newsletter with the newly elected board members. If you need to change some things in your rules, this would be how you'd notify everybody, that kind of stuff. Social committee, a lot of people like to get together and hang out because remember, this is a community garden. People really want to get together so that they can spend time with people. If you've moved to an area and you don't know anyone, this is a great way. A good example of one that I've seen is the Decula Community Garden. That's part of the Harvest Gwinnett family. They get together all the time and have socials. They may go to a restaurant and have meal together. They may meet at the garden itself, but it's really a little family, and that's great. That's how it should be. Because again, community garden. A website committee. So I mentioned several times that you want to have a presence online because that's how you get people to know you're there. So a website and then social media. Post pictures of folks growing stuff. Talk about the social things that you guys do. That's a great way. When you have people moving to the area, how do you think they learn about the area? They go online, they search. And so that's a wonderful way to bring in new people and meet new people. And you never know, you may end up with a lifelong friend. And then the membership committee. So these are the group of people that are going to take in the new applications, process those, that kind of stuff. Insect and disease control. So you need to decide first and foremost before you even do this, are you going to use organic techniques? Or are you going to allow inorganic fertilizers, pesticides, stuff like that? Most community gardens opt for the organic. And as I mentioned before, it can be very challenging, especially to new gardeners. So you have to take that into consideration and you have to offer some type of educational training. It's easier than it used to be, but there's still a lot of challenges with regards to organic gardening if you're a newbie. Don't let that stop you because it's totally doable, but use Extension as a resource. We're here to help walk you through that, and we're happy to come out and help you set that up, do some training, that kind of stuff. We also have a lot of recorded material. I do these webinars all the time. I've got one on using organic sources for nutrient deficiencies and how do you control insects and diseases organically. They're two videos. Don't watch them at 3 a.m. because you'll fall asleep. But they're a good way to educate yourself if you're curious about how to maintain a good community garden under organic techniques. And of course, integrated pest management for pests and disease. We have the big toolbox for that. You can draw from a bunch of different things, and we can help you with that too. So if you have pesticides, if you're going to allow those, you need to decide at what level are they going to be used. Herbicides, you may want to decide not to use those except in the case of like fire ants. And if all other maintenance type things have failed. So that really falls under the IPM pyramid. That's like cultural and mechanical and physical. And then all the way up at the tippy top where we only use it kind of as a last resort would be pesticides and herbicides. Because they're considered chemical, synthetic, whatever. We allow it. It's perfectly fine, but you got to try all the other stuff first. And then controlled applications. So you may want to say for things like that, that individual gardeners are not going to apply herbicides, that it has to be a, board-wide or garden-wide type of agreement. Use of fertilizers. So organic can be recommended, but you have to keep in mind so there are more complete organic fertilizers now than there used to be. Manufacturers finally figured out that people were getting tired of buying 10 and 15 different types of organic fertilizers. And so they started putting a lot of those all together in one, similar to what synthetic fertilizers do. So it's easier now, thank goodness. But you may have to apply things more because remember, these are organic, natural type. I'm talking fish meal, I'm talking bone meal. I don't want to tell you that you need a degree in chemistry to figure that out, but if you go watch my organic nutrients deficiencies webinar, you'll find out there is actually a lot of chemistry involved. You've got to know what elements the plant needs, and you have to be able to recognize when they're deficient in it so that you can go get the correct nutrient, borax here, magnesium, that kind of stuff, so that you can recognize which nutrient you need to add and which product it's going to be. So there's a lot that goes into it if you want to do organic. Don't let that dissuade you. It's just some education on your part. But yeah, you do need to understand and know that. Let's see what else. So often plants are slow to uptake these nutrients, so you kind of have to stay ahead of it, especially if you're in raised beds. It can take 3 months for nutrients to kind of get into that soil column and be what we call bioavailable to the plants. So try to plan ahead, try to do some education of the gardeners so that they're aware of this. And it can be very expensive to do organics also. Don't forget that, because again, you're purchasing many different products. You may want to decide that you're going to get products for the whole garden to use, and that's what the fee that they pay for that bed is. If that's the case, then you'll have a little shed and, all that kind of stuff there. And you need to do some educating because more is not always better. So really, plants don't ultimately care where their nutrients come from. So just kind of keep that in mind. And, sometimes people kind of use organic where they can, use some inorganic, but you have to decide that ahead of time. So inorganic fertilizers can be used and may be, as I mentioned, easier for people to manage. Their nutrients oftentimes are already formulated for very quick absorption for the plants. So if you're dealing with people that don't know a whole lot, they're newbies, this may be an appropriate thing for them to use. And often fertilizers can be a lot cheaper. Inorganics can be cheaper than organics. Sometimes they're easier to find and source. You get to some of the big box stores, they're doing better about having organics. Ace Hardware typically has a lot, and of course, you can go online. But inorganics have been readily available for a really long time. And they're available in all sorts of different formulations. And, what we usually recommend at Extension is a good 10-10-10 fertilizer. That's your NPK ratio without going into the big time specifics of it. It's going to be nitrogen, that's for shoots, all the green stuff, phosphorus for your roots and your flowering, and it helps convey energy. And then potassium is going to be your fruits, and then the crop quality and that kind of stuff. So, and then there's, some crossover on the phosphorus and potassium. But you may want to recommend that kind of stuff in your community garden board notes or whatever your recommended formulations of things are. Garden needs. So here it says you may eventually need fencing to prevent wildlife damage and limit theft. Depending on where you are, you may want to consider that anyway. So we have a lot of deer in the area. We'll just go to wildlife damage and other little varmints that can get in there and chew and eat on things. Deer are a really big problem. So you can try using things like motion detector sprinklers. Deer don't like being harassed, and that's a good one to harass them, along with some other small animals. And you can set those up around a perimeter, including people if you don't want them out there at 10:30 at night. But if you have a fence, specifically like a 10 to 12 foot fence, chain link, whatever, you don't have to worry about it as much. So if you have the money, I would recommend going on the fencing. Otherwise, you'll probably have to have some kind of deer deterrent, because they're going to be a problem. Once they figure out what you have, they are there and they're hard to get rid of. You need easy access to the garden. I mentioned that before. Right near a road, an easy place for people to park, someplace where they're not going to get harassed if they park. So if you have, a lot in your subdivision and you're going to turn that into a community garden, make sure it's okay to park there in front of it and that the neighbors nearby aren't going to get angry. You need a compost area to manage plant stuff and recycle nutrients back in the garden. So again, be careful here. This is where education comes in handy, because some gardens are, if you can't throw diseased plant material into the compost bin because you're just going to reinfect. So you may want to educate people on what they can put in the compost bin and what they need to put in the discard bin. And then discard just gets hauled off. You'll probably need some kind of a shed. And again, this is where a grant can come into play. This will pay for a shed where you can keep fertilizers, where you can keep all your shovels and hand tools, and you can get little shelves to put all that stuff on. You can hang boards up with watering schedules and all of that stuff. You can put a whiteboard up, and it's a place where people can go if it rains. So that's a good thing to do, especially if you can get a larger size shed to do that, or maybe you have an overhang and then a shed next door where you can store stuff. It definitely is something that it comes in handy. There's been a lot of times where I'm back out in my garden and it starts to rain and I don't make it all the way up to the house and I get wet. So if you have some place where people can go right nearby and store all their junk and lock it up, that's great. People really appreciate that. Seating areas, so picnic tables, Adirondack chairs, all sorts of places where people can sit and chit chat after they're gardening or before they're gardening, or maybe they just want to come out and socialize. That's how you meet people. Encourage that. Encourage that. And a restroom or a portable facility. So if you can, have a porta potty, but if it's in a neighborhood or something like that, don't worry so much. People can just run home, but do keep that in mind. Fencing, here's some ideas for fencing. These are nice wrought iron fences, but obviously, that's a lot of money. So tall chain link is a good one. You can do a privacy fence. There's all sorts of options here, so you need to talk about that. Composting area, you can go big or you can go small. These are just pallets that somebody has put together. So you can do something like that. You can recycle the old plant material, make sure there's no weeds in there. We don't need any seeds. And the rules for compost hold here, no meats. So if you didn't finish your ham sandwich, do not toss it into your compost bin. You're just going to get rats and other things. And then as that soil gets, built up there, you can put organic matter in. Gardeners can take it if it's completed compost. Perfect. Shed and seating areas. These are just some examples. You can see this is the Snellville Community Garden on the right side. They've got a nice picnic shelter here. And then you've got another smaller shed over here where people can keep stuff. And you might want to develop social events for, get-togethers. Break bread out there. Have everybody bring their lunch out or a dinner, have dinner under the stars, that kind of stuff. It's a great way to socialize and get to know people. And it's also a good way you can get members on social media, invite them to these little events. Harvest Gwinnett, I use them a lot as an example. They do a spring and a fall event kind of celebration thing where they have a lot of folks there and let people come up and ask questions and walk through the garden and see what it's all about, and a lot of educational stuff so folks can think about whether they want to do that. And then, of course, have fun and enjoy it, because ultimately you're outside, you're helping folks, you're meeting people, and it's a great way to just be part of the community. So some issues that can cause failure of a community garden: bickering and lack of leadership in the organization. So I mentioned having a board or ambassadors. Make sure that if you are in a position, you're doing the position. If you can no longer do the position due to mobility issues or cognitive issues or whatever, step down, please, because there is somebody, I guarantee you, who is highly frustrated that they're doing the lion's share of work when you're not. And you may enjoy the leadership position, but everyone else is resenting you. So make sure that there is strong leadership in whatever board positions, that you are not totalitarian. It's not a government. You're elected. If you can't do it, go ahead and just resign and let somebody else take over. Weed control issues, people get so ticked off about that, and I completely understand. If you're letting crabgrass overcome, it's over, man. I'm mad. Hate crabgrass. So just make sure that you're weeding and that's written in somewhere, the maintenance of the beds. Harvesting issues, if you are going to be out of town, have somebody harvest for you. Don't leave it. If you are a fair weather gardener and when it gets hot, you don't want to be out there, let somebody know. Say, hey, I hate being outside after it's 90 degrees. You can take whatever you want out of my bed. Perfect. They'll do that. And then make sure to address the insurance and liability. You can get policies for it. Do it. You don't want somebody getting hurt and suing. That's the failure right there. Be financially responsible. All right. What's a master gardener's role? So in addition to being the coordinator and working with Extension as an educator, I'm also a master gardener. So if you're a master gardener on here getting continuing education, know that you can take a part in a community garden. You can either help start one or you can go help educate at one. We have opportunities in Gwinnett County in a whole bunch of different gardens. So education, have a hands-on class, talk about herbs, talk about tomatoes, share your experience. Pantry garden, talk about having, a pizza garden, tomatoes and basil and that kind of stuff in a pot. Add some signage if you're going to have a class. Post it out front of the garden. Class today at 5 on tomatoes. Host an open house. Be there to answer those questions. Lots of gardeners have questions about what they're doing. Almost done. Here's a Center for Urban Agriculture. website where we have a lot of publications on community gardens. You can use that QR code to go check it out. Don't worry, this is being recorded, so you can always go over to our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel and check that out. And then here's our UGA publications page. You can just type in community gardens or gardens, and you'll pop up with all sorts of stuff. You can see there some of what, and that QR code will take you right there. And so you can bury a lot of troubles digging in the dirt. I like that one. But overall, we have the questions here. So we have a lot of classes. People find us in a bunch of diverse ways. We're on the main extension calendar. We're also on, if you go and you search Master Gardener Program, we're on that calendar. We pop up on a lot of different websites. You can go to ours, of course. I do record, so they go to our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and that's where we stick our recordings, so you can go check those out if you missed something or you came in late. That's always there. And whoops, go backwards. Trying to get the there we go. All right, trying to get the chat pulled up so that I can see if there's any questions. So I'll go through and answer questions now. I do like to talk, so I should be done by 1 o'clock, which is unusual for me. Will the PowerPoint be made available to us after the lecture? Yes. If you are interested in the slide deck, I'm happy to send that to you in a handout format. So make note of my preferably on the Gwinnett County email address. I tend to keep stuff separate so that it's easier for me to find. So email me on the lisa.klein@gwinnettcounty.com email address and just say I'd like the slide deck or the PowerPoint for the community garden presentation. Advice on getting permission from vacant lot owners, also zoning advice on water collection like rain barrels with funnels or something without easy access to power gutters. So advice on permission from vacant lot owners. Everybody should be able to look up property records online these days. Gwinnett County makes it super simple, and so you should be able to find that lot online, and then it should give you a mailing address for whoever owns that lot. So if it's just a vacant lot, you should be able to see who owns that lot. You can then just write them a letter and say, hey, we have this great idea. We'd love to have a community garden. You've got a vacant lot here. We would love to be able to use that vacant lot for a community garden. We'll pay for liability insurance, yada, yada, yada. So that's a good way of finding out who owns it and then writing to them and asking for permission. So zoning advice on water collection. So generally, we don't have the same problems that they have out west. So out west, water is a very valuable resource because they don't get near the rainfall that we do. Typically, if you have a rain barrel, here, nobody's going to say anything to you. In fact, we encourage it. The county water resources teaches rain barrel classes multiple times a year where you can make a rain barrel for $40. And we encourage using rain barrels. So if you don't have access to water on site and you would like to have rain barrels, they're simple things you could make. If you have a shed and you're allowed to put a shed on there, you can put some gutters and collect the rain off of that. I've seen where you have 2 or 3 rain barrels lined up. You have a corrugated plastic roof with gutters that then flow off the end of that corrugated roof and then into there. Just know you should not, and I say can't, use water off of a composite roofing, your typical shingle roof, because of the chemicals. I really would only use water off for a vegetable garden off of a plastic or metal roof. I wouldn't use it off of a shingle roof because unless it's like terracotta or something like that, but we don't have a lot of that here. So, there are ways, there's plenty of plans online about how to set that up. Is there a comprehensive list of all the so UGA was trying to compile that. I collected as many as I could find in Gwinnett County. I think we had like at that time close to 50. That's a lot of community gardens in one county. So if you extrapolate that by the metro area, that's an awful lot of community gardens. Keep in mind some of these were rather large, like Lanier Community Gardens, or they were Harvest Gwinnett, where they had, that all the way down to very small community gardens that were in a subdivision or something like that. But there's a lot of those that we don't even have a clue on because they're really not open to the public. So we miss out on a lot of them. Are there any permits or legal considerations when it comes to community gardens? I would always say if you're in a city limit, check with the city. If you're in unincorporated county, Gwinnett County, as far as I know, there are no restrictions. If you're in a different county, always check. Just call the zoning board and ask them. You might be able to do a search online for your county in the code and see if there's anything about community gardens. Just check first before. That's just part of the research that you would do if you found a place and you wanted to do it. But if it is all enclosed on private property and the private property owner is perfectly fine with it, generally there's not going to be an issue. When building beds, should you place anything on the ground to prevent unwanted grass or yes, definitely. Bermuda grass is horrible as it creeps up the sides and pops out the top. So if you can go through and plan and kill out the Bermuda under the beds, grass be gone. I know a lot of times people are like, oh, keep it organic. It's going to come back, folks. It will, and you will get really angry because it'll creep into your beds. Go ahead and use some herbicide on the front point when you're getting everything set up. Grass Be Gone is a great way to kill off Bermuda or Zoysia, and then you can put some type of weed fabric or something else down. Put some type of slate or free wood chips or whatever you want to put down in your walkways. But you will be much happier if you're not dealing with grass creeping up the sides of your raised beds. So unwanted animals, wherever your compost bin is, make sure you site it far away from your raised beds. You will have things like voles with a V. V is not for victory. V is for vole. We hate those guys. They'll come in and eat your sweet potatoes and other things. So site those compost bins far away from wherever your raised beds are. You'll have other little things, chipmunks, squirrels, that kind of stuff. Try to have those piles of things away from where your raised beds are so that they have to go through a big open area. They don't like doing that because of aerial predators and other predators. So you want to be careful about where you're siting that kind of stuff. You're welcome. You're welcome. Best places to purchase soil in bulk. Do we have any vendors? So we don't have vendors through Extension. I would say reach out to some of the, like in Gwinnett, it'd be Buck Jones. They sell topsoil. You can use S3, Soil 3. They'll deliver the big yellow bag out. Just know that if you have a raised bed, that you have to keep an eye on nutrients because whether you buy big bags of raised bed soil or you get the big bag from Soil 3, either way, those are artificial soils, and so they'll get depleted of nutrients. So you have to keep a tab on all of that. Individual bed owners typically are responsible for doing that themselves, and Extension will do a soil test, $8 here in Gwinnett County. Different counties, it may be more or less money, but you'll want to test your soils periodically to make sure that there's nutrients in there and that you haven't depleted them. But generally, if you go to Landscape Supply where you can get gravel or you can get mulch in bulk, they're also going to have topsoil in mulch. So you may want to add some topsoil in, good quality topsoil, mineral soil to artificial soils, raised bed soils that you get. You'll have some of the minerals incorporated in there and your plants may do better, especially with water retention. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions, I'm right at 1 o'clock. So if there are, I'm happy to stay. Otherwise, I will go ahead and stop sharing. And going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and hopefully you got some valuable information out of it. Till next time. Thank you.